So how come you guys call yourselves sluts?
Well, Rock says that's what they're gonna call us anyway, so we might as well beat him to the punch.
Is that the kind of music you want to play?
Play? No. Produce. You know, bring up the bass line, control stuff. That's what I'm gonna do.
So how come you're just riding around?
I don't know. I was following this band for a while, and, well, I thought I had a chance, but all they wanted was... Look, you don't just walk in and say, hi, I'm a producer. You know, you gotta work up to it, okay?
When they say don't judge a book by its cover, they had this late 80s Troma release in mind. Granted, you have to peel back a lot of layers, but this movie was ahead of its time when it comes to making a social statement. We're still up all night, and this episode, we watched Chopper Chicks in Zombietown.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to USA Up All Night with me, Rhonda.
Hi, I'm Gilbert Gottfried, the comedian in the cupboard, for USA Up All Night.
In this movie, you'll see two of your favorite stars. Now, if you drink enough beer, you'll start seeing more of your favorite stars.
Stay with me on USA Up All Night.
Welcome to Still Up All Night, your one-stop shop for all things USA Up All Night. I'm Travis Yates, joined by my co-host Rob Cady. And Rob, we're back after summer break. In the spirit of reliving the awesome B movies from our youth, we decided to take the summer off, like we used to when we were kids. So Rob, the question everyone asks on the first day back to school, how was your summer break?
Not as eventful as I would like it to have been, but hey, that's the COVID world we live in right now. So
it is, and of course we're in Florida, so it's a raging fire down here. A raging fire of COVID. That'd be a great alternative title for a USA Up All Night movie. But yeah, my summer break was good. I was able to do some summer reading, specifically Austin Trunick's, of course, the totally rad The Canon Film Guide Volume 1. And I want to share an excerpt from the book by Sam Furstenberg, who eloquently explains the importance of B movies, which, you know, we attempt to do quite often when discovering some of the groundbreaking filmmaking techniques first attempted, you know, by daring filmmakers during their low-budget exploits during the time period that we cover on this podcast. For example, our Episode 7 film Return to Horror High, which was way before its time with a Christopher Nolan-esque timeline and a wink-wink and nod to the horror genre, later seen in the Scream franchise. So it's actually the foreword to the Canon Film Guide Volume 1 that Furstenberg writes, the 1980s also saw the emergence of the home video phenomenon, the videocassette tape rental economy, and the rise to power of non-major independent production and distribution companies to supply the product that was missing from the marketplace. Canon became the largest of them all, producing more than 530 movies. At some point, it was called a mini-major. In the 1990s, studios took notice of what was happening and started to produce the same types of movies that Canon was making with the likes of Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Van Damme, and so on, but with much bigger budgets. Those new genre movies were much more elaborate, expensive, and better looking, and consequently, the majors reclaimed the market for themselves. By doing so, the majors pushed the independent companies back to the corners they came out of in the first place. And he goes on to write, there was a capsule of about 15 years through the 1980s and the first half of the 1990s, which can be characterized or branded as the period which Canon revolutionized the role of independent genre filmmaking in Hollywood.
Well said.
So, Rob, one, this makes me so sad, that Furstenberg line of the studios pushing the indie companies back into the corner that they came from.
Yeah.
But it also puts into perspective what we're celebrating here on the Still Up All Night podcast. I mean, sure, we love the silliness of these films. That's what USA Up All Night and Rhonda and Gilbert were all about. But it also seems like each episode we find just some filmmaking gold in these films that are often tossed aside and not taken serious from a cinematic perspective. So if you're listening to us thank you for celebrating the films with us, and we'll continue to celebrate that window of time that Furstenberg mentions that ended up being much more than just a low-budget period in the film industry, but also a period of reinvention.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, having that sort of flexibility to take those chances and risks and do something that isn't just totally geared towards, box office receipts. That's why we're here. It's what we love about this stuff.
And coincidentally, Rob, Furstenberg directed two of my favorite 80s B movies of all time, Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo, and American Ninja.
Oh, absolutely. Two classics right there.
Yeah. And again, we want to reiterate our thanks for all the work done by Austin Trunick to write the book. He is arduously working on Volume 2 now and posts awesome updates on his Twitter feed, so you can follow him at Canon Film Guide, and you won't be disappointed, I promise you.
Well, I think he's getting pretty close to being done with Volume 2 as well from some of the recent updates he's posted.
And I understand the plan is for a third volume at least, perhaps even more. I'm not sure. I think he's breaking them up into 4-year time periods, so we may even get a fourth volume out of all this if we're lucky.
That'd be awesome.
So that takes us to this episode's film. We are back in a big way, kicking off the fall semester with a movie by request. It's Chopper Chicks in Zombietown. We're coming off the heels of our first official Troma film with The Toxic Avenger, and we'll keep going with that theme. Like episode 10's film, Surf Nazis Must Die, Chopper Chicks in Zombietown wasn't a Troma film, but it was a Troma release in 1989. Whew. Okay. First initial reaction, Rob, to Chopper Chicks in Zombietown.
It's an odd film. It felt like in many ways a step down compared to the previous Troma releases. As you just mentioned, Toxic Avenger and Surf Nazis. It's an odd film. There's definitely a step down in quality, clearly in budget as well. But as we discussed, there are some absolute little golden nuggets to be shined up in this one that help it along the way. Not the biggest fan of it, but we'll get into that.
So, and maybe it's this semester I'm teaching cultural representation in cinema, so it may be that it's fresh on my mind, but I'm really gonna bring out some big guns here when it comes to analyzing this film. So hopefully,
I hope so. Yeah.
Hopefully you're on board. So. This movie is written and directed by Dan Hoskins, and Hoskins only has one other credit to his name, writer of the 1987 dramedy Pretty Smart, which was Patricia Arquette's first film. Are you familiar with Pretty Smart? I don't recall seeing it.
I don't know. I'd have to see something from it. It doesn't ring a bell, particularly as her first role. I'm Googling it now to see if that doesn't look familiar to me at all. So I don't think I've seen that one.
The crux of the film, with the giveaway of the title it's looks aren't everything, brains aren't everything. Sort of finding that mix for a woman of the 80s, I think. So we'll come back to that in just a bit. But so I'm not real familiar with the film either, but I read up a little bit. So one of the producers of Chopper Chicks in Zombietown is Arthur Sarkeesian. So Rob Sarkeesian has had a Forrest Gump-like career. He is a former English fashion designer turned film producer, and he went on to produce While You Were Sleeping, Last Man Standing, and the Rush Hour franchise.
So I'm sure he did well with that franchise.
Yeah, and of course, Last Man Standing with Bruce Willis. While You Were Sleeping, I believe, was that. Is it Meg Ryan? It's not Meg Ryan. It's
no.
Oh, it's Sandra Bullock. Got to be Sandra.
Oh yes, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is, and she pretends to be the girlfriend of the guy in a coma.
Yes,
and then falls in love with his brother or something like that. Yeah.
And I think we just coined the subtitle of every rom-com made in the 90s. Is that Meg Ryan? Oh, if not, it's got to be Sandra Bullock. So there you go. So the movie stars a host of veteran TV actors. Jamie Rose gets top billing as a fiery redhead Dee Dee. Rob, I wasn't familiar with Rose. She's a Gina Davis lookalike, and she's a veteran TV actor and has appeared in a handful of movies over the years. She also runs an acting studio in LA present day, and she wrote a book, Shut Up and Dance, The Joy of Letting Go of the Lead on the Dance Floor and Off. So a busy career for Jamie Rose. Did she strike any memories for you?
She looked familiar, but I couldn't, without looking her up, come up with anything that I specifically recalled her from. But if you go through particularly her TV career, the 8 million different shows she'd been on, so hence why she looked familiar. But again, nothing I specifically recalled, and certainly not in terms of movies.
Yeah. It also stars Catherine Carlin as just the really outspoken, she's a fun character, the leader of the biker gang, Rocks. And Carlin has such an impressive resume that we could probably play 6 degrees of Catherine Carlin. Her TV appearances include Night Court, Married with Children, Passions, Bold and the Beautiful, Days of Our Lives, Desperate Housewives, Beverly Hills 90210. The list goes on and on. Again, it's that gal that was in That Thing sort of deal. I'm not really familiar with Catherine Carlin. Are you?
No, not at all. Like even in this, she didn't look familiar to me, and same thing. I had to look her up, and but even then, most of the stuff she'd been in was stuff I wouldn't necessarily have seen. Mm-hmm. So yeah, she was the big kind of for being, essentially one of the lead characters, the one I was probably least familiar with.
And then Leisha Naff, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who plays TC. Now, she's got a story of great interest to you and I, Rob. Do you know why?
I mean, she's been in a million great things, like Total Recall.
Yes. And not only in Total Recall, but she's perhaps most well known as the three-breasted mutant in Total Recall. I mean, that's perhaps one of the most infamous Flash scenes in all of cinema, short of maybe Phoebe Cates in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, right? Well,
and I just lost her name. The Sharon Stone with the leg maneuver.
Yes, that's a different Flash of all sorts of kinds.
But those three are probably the biggest ones.
So Rob, even despite earning a Daytime Emmy nomination for her work in an after-school special, Naff left acting to become a journalist, studying at Florida Atlantic University and starting as a staff writer at the Palm Beach Post.
Oh.
So for those of you who don't know, that the Still Up All Night studio is located in South Florida. So Naff's first journalism gig was right in our own backyard. Naff did make a return to Hollywood of sorts as an investigative celebrity reporter. So, interesting career for her as well.
Definitely, yeah.
Chopper Chicks in Zombietown is labeled as a 1989 film, but it didn't see a U.S. release until April 27th, 1990 at the World Fest Houston International Film Festival, where it didn't win Best Independent Theatrical Feature Film. It was beat out by Revenge of the Radioactive Reporter, which sadly somehow never aired on USA Up All Night. We'll never find out what that's about unless you know, Rob. Are you familiar with Revenge of the Radioactive Reporter?
I am not. I haven't even heard the title before, so that's a brand new one for me.
We might have to look that one up on our own to view and maybe bring it up at a later date. All right, so Chopper Chicks debuted on USA Up All Night on August 29th, 1992. It would air just 4 more times, with its 5th and final appearance on July 15th, 1994. Okay, Rob, so I want to circle back to our early conversation about how these B movies can sneak in some groundbreaking material. And I'm going to lay some heavy stuff on you, okay? Are you ready?
I hope so. I hope I'm prepared for this.
All right, so in 1991, Thelma and Louise was released. And the only way that Ridley Scott could get the film made was to direct it himself. Scott was producing the film and could not find a single director willing to take on the project. And the reason is because the screenplay flipped the script, literally, by reworking the male buddy formula while making it a road film that featured female protagonists. One unnamed director even said to him, "Listen, dude, it's two bitches in a car."
Damn.
So how in the world am I making a connection to this episode's film? Well, 2 years prior to Thelma and Louise, the opening scene of Chopper Chicks in Zombietown features a all-female biker gang roaring down the highway. It's not Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper a la Easy Rider. It's Jamie Rose and Catherine Carlin. And it all goes back to Sam Furstenberg's point of how the indie films, the movie makers, were the ones pushing the social envelopes in the 1980s. And we see that here from the get-go in Chopper Chicks. Complete with an opening song, Underclass, by Alex Chilton, with the lyrics, "It's a gas to be a member of the underclass."
Oh, I mean, yeah, there's an absolute, feminist edge in this film that kind of just really lingers in the background and is never really, pulled to the front. But yeah, it's there. Absolutely.
I don't know. At times, I felt like they were hitting us over the head with it. I mean, in the time when we'll get to some of these scenes, but when they roll into this town, zombie town, essentially, there's men shaking their heads at them. At one point, the sheriff says, "I'm going to get these women out of my town." I mean, it is like, it is very, very obvious at times. What'd you make of the biker gang? They're labeled the cycle sluts.
Well, as they say in the film, they're gonna call us sluts, so we might as well own it.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. Another very powerful statement that we just heard in our cold open clip. All right, so let's then kind of get into the plot here, because it is a lot. So the cycle sluts, they're just kind of roaring through the countryside, town to town, living their best life, kind of as outcasts. And they find themselves in this kind of unique area. It's an kind of an unnamed desert landscape, presumably New Mexico, Nevada, something like that. They cruise by a sign that reads, "St. Peter's Home for Blind Orphans." That's very specific. And the sign is complete with a smiling sun emoji wearing sunglasses. Ooh. So the lack of PC in the 80s rearing its ugly head here.
Well, there's a bunch of that in the film as well. But, I mean, that's the time these were made. And, yeah, there's, as we've touched on in just about every episode, those are things we have to manage these days.
Yes. The gang stops in a small town, Zariah, population 128, to get some food. And I love the foreshadowing when one of the girls says, "I'm hungry, let's eat. We'll be out of here in 2 hours." And, you just know, wait a minute. And there's a lot to read in there, because you're heading into Zombietown. She wants to eat, and as we'll get into, she's the first one that becomes a zombie.
Of course. Yes. Well, when she goes looking for meat.
Right. Yes. So the girl rides off, and a dwarf in a tuxedo appears out of nowhere, sets up a little ladder, and erases the population sign of Zariah so it reads 127, and then cut to a scene of a dead body being removed from a funeral casket and replaced with sandbags. So I have to admit, I'm intrigued at this point. What are you thinking here as we're kicking off the movie?
Well, yeah, I intentionally on this one went in blind because I hadn't seen it before, so didn't want to read anything or even really watch a trailer. So yeah, at that point it was like I had no idea what was going on, because we're then treated to the very odd funeral scene.
Oh yes, and the girls are the star of the movie, but Rob, this supporting cast is just incredible. It's an also filled with that guy from That Thing, and classic guy from That Thing, Don Calfa, best known as the mortician in 1985's Return of the Living Dead, and here, not unintentional, I'm sure, plays Ralph Willem, the owner operator of Willem's Funeral Home, who then was involved in that casket burial when the sand starts pouring out of the corner, and he notices he just starts kicking it down into the ground. in a
He's
room.
he's an absolute scene stealer and highlight of the movie for me. Just a goofy role for a guy who generally plays fairly goofy stuff. At least in Return of the Living Dead, which I probably most recognize him from. But enjoyed his performance in this and wish he had been around a little bit more than he was.
Yeah, and absolutely a scene stealer. I want to go back to that in a bit. But, of course, we've buried the lead here, as this is a very early role for Billy Bob Thornton,
Yes.
who plays Dee Dee's husband. And, boy, when he first makes his appearance, it's hard to believe that this guy went on to become an A-lister, because he just...
He's an interesting looking individual already, but he's got more hair than I think I've ever seen him with, and he made the right choice later in for the most part getting rid of it, because it's let's just say it's an interesting look, and he suits the role he plays in this film. He did. Also, early MTV VJ Martha Quinn and comedian Hal Sparks round out the well-known actors that have minor roles in the film. So we're introduced to the residents from the St. Peter's Home for the Blind Orphans a little later by way of broken-down school bus, and we get some more fun foreshadowing when one of the boys says, "Come on, we're dying out here." I mean, Dan Hoskins really having a lot of fun with wordplay in his script, and I thought it was hilarious because of the dry, matter-of-fact way that the actors deliver the lines. The script is poking fun at itself, but the characters aren't. Well, another group too. All the kids on the bus were every time they appeared, delivered just probably the best lines in the movie, and generated, at least for me, the most laughs. And I enjoyed them and wish they had been in a couple more scenes. But,
what I thought of too is how just perfect would it have been if the two Coreys were two of the boys on the bus. That would have just been incredible.
Icing on the cake at that point.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we finally get to the zombies promised to us in the title, when a random boy on a bicycle investigates a strange sound that he hears in a mine shaft in the desert. He wanders into the mine and finds the source of the noise. It's coming from behind a locked door, but only whoever was there last left the lock hanging unlocked. So the boy walks into the room and then asks, "Daddy?" And then, blood squirts out from underneath the door. So the plot is coming together here rather quickly, which I appreciate, since usually that doesn't happen for us until around 45 minutes or so of these movies.
At least.
So what'd you think of our kind of quasi-introduction to the zombies?
Well, I mean, I hate to jump ahead, but when the zombies, free themselves, what was that music?
Okay, yeah, we'll get there in a minute. We're not there just yet, almost, because
it gets there fairly quickly relative to the movies we've watched, but it still wasn't making a whole lot of sense at that point, because I couldn't initially figure out exactly what the zombies were saying. And they're different from traditional zombies in that they do vocalize and appear to have some intelligence. But I couldn't initially make out quite what they were saying, and of course it all comes together and completely makes sense.
Right.
A little ways down the road.
Yeah, when the zombies eat the boy and escape from the room there, I mean, circus music is like the best way I would describe it.
Yep.
It's, complete with slide whistle. Like it really immediately set the tone for, okay, this is not going to be a horror film. This is more comedy than anything.
And with the title, I and the sort of roughness of the gang, I sort of thought, I figured it was a horror comedy, but I thought there would be a little more by way of horror, and that, as soon as that music kicked in, I was like, nope, we're all in on the comedy side.
Yeah, that all goes out the window as soon as that door kicks open and the music starts. So we have a town that finds its dead, turning into zombies and locking them up in the mines of the mountains instead of disposing of them. Okay, I can get on board with that. I mean, one of the things I thought is fun about the Walking Dead TV series was to see how like each new camp that the group came across handled the dead. And so I thought, well, this is interesting. I mean, we'll see where this goes, right? And then, of course, but that darn music. Then just
detracting. And then, of course, I think it's in the second time they cut to the zombies, as we realize they're headed back to town. They're saying home. And I was like, oh, okay. That now it makes sense. And
really, the zombies are secondary to this story. And so they're barely a blip here in what Hoskins is trying to accomplish here. So, all right. So the gals disperse throughout the town for different reasons, looking for tools, looking for love, most of them looking for meat, so to speak. Yes. When Ralph Willem, the funeral homeowner, pulls out in front of one of the gals, the one that just wanted to, get something to eat, and then hits her over the head to ensure that she's unconscious. And then in the next scene, he's injecting her with some sort of substance, and she's in this room with the initial person that we saw taken from the casket in the beginning of the film. So it turns out that Willem is behind all of this. And then he tells Bob the dwarf that we saw earlier that he wants all the cycle sluts in the mine by the next day. And, this goes back to what you were saying, that, Rob, it's a shame that this is presented as a comedy because Don Calfa is just so criminally underrated. And this could have very easily been a creepy horror film.
Bring back the dead. You're mad, they said. And mind you, this was the United States government. Needless to say, I left. Yes, sir.
I've been a bad boy.
Now go get those whores. I want their dead asses in that mine by tomorrow.
Yeah. I think sorely lacking in the budget to really get there, and we see that as we move forward that special effects weren't the forte of anyone involved in this, particularly anything sort of gore related.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen worse for sure, but they did the okay for what they had to work with. From the get-go, Dee Dee was hesitant to go to the town, and then we finally find out why when Billy Bob Thornton makes his appearance, and it turns out that he's Dee Dee's husband, Donnie, and Dee Dee's been gone for 6 years. In fact, we later find out that she was homecoming queen of the high school in Zariah, so she was the cycle sluts kind of move from town to town and take wayward souls from those towns that want to join them. And at one point, they were in this town, obviously, and Dee Dee was one of those wayward souls. So
yes, we slowly get a couple different backstories, as we one, and I honestly, this is we sort of touched on this before. The movie is very reluctant to provide names of characters for. I want to say it was almost like 25 minutes in before I at least figured out two people's names. And so, one character calls home and, has a child at home and that she's left behind, and one character's an AWOL from the military. So we get a couple different backstories.
One gal everyone thinks is a mute. And
yes.
They don't ever, they barely touch on that. So absolutely, this was a large ensemble cast that they didn't do a whole lot of work with them, presenting them to us beyond kind of really Dee Dee and Rox, and then a little bit TC. So, Rob, we get perhaps the most bizarre musical interlude in film history when the gang leader Rox walks into a saloon alone, changes the dusty jukebox that's playing a sad country song to some piano and guitar laden rock song, and starts singing "Do What Your Big Mama Told You To."
We've got to set the stage a little more clearly too. It's a seedy bar in town that is also currently holding a funeral
for another dead, right? Another dead
for another dead townie.
For a small town, a lot of dead people in this town.
A lot of dead people.
Yeah, and at one point it's an open casket too, and so she walks up to the casket and like starts moving the mouth, so he's singing along with her, and then she goes back to grinding on the jukebox. I found it very unsettling.
And I honestly, for a minute, wondered like, oh, are we in for sort of a musical? Are we establishing something here that we're going to get some more songs? And I actually kind of got excited for a minute that we could be in for something really different, but much to my chagrin, that was the only musical interlude.
But props to Catherine Carlin. I mean, she went for it. And
yeah, absolutely.
Same thing, kind of scene stealer. Like nobody told her she was in a comedy. She was bringing it out. She was bringing it like a hardcore drama, and I loved it.
Yeah, I loved it, and was also confused by it because there was no like why that song, and
yeah,
just the whole scene. Why? There was no backstory to that. There was no seeming significance for any piece of it, and as we said, there's a funeral going on. So obviously, in this bar, the people there for the funeral did not appreciate what she did. Just
that's great.
Such a weird.
Well, we never get her backstory, and a little later we do get some of the other cycle sluts backstories, and so you just have to maybe assume that was an attempt here of character development, that maybe she came from a very oppressive home, and do what your big mama told you.
Yeah.
And so I assume that's what that was, and she's kind of the mom to all of these gals. So. Yeah, but what else I find unsettling is a film that never settles on what type of film it's going to be, as we've talked about here. I mean, we've got all sorts of really strong feminism messages in this film, but at around the 34-minute mark, things get really uncomfortable when a guy in the bar grabs the very young, apparently mute, newer member of the biker gang, drags her over to this open coffin in the saloon, starts choking her, tells her to kiss the corpse. Really not cool with that scene.
And it felt so, for a movie that, as you said, hadn't settled on anything, it still felt wildly out of character relative to everything we'd seen to that point. So yeah, I was absolutely confused by that sequence, and just was like, what is happening now?
Right. You take the zombies out of this, and now you've got a group of female biker gang that rolls into this small town that is traditionalists and does not like seeing women out of their old school, what would be considered traditional roles from back in the 50s and 60s, really. And then you throw scenes like this on it, and then it makes sense. And it's a very realistic horror film, right?
Yeah,
But it's not. So Rox breaks a whiskey bottle on the counter and confronts the guys. However, the very next shot is outside of the saloon with Dee Dee saying to the rest of the girls, "We got to get out of here. Where's Rox?" And then cut to the coffin flying out of the bar. So again, this like really disturbing scene, followed by this comedic. Here we go. We got a good old fashioned bar brawl, right outside, and we get this outside, brawl, and I'm all for it because I want to see all these guys get their just due by getting just the stuffing kicked out of them by the gals, but still, just juxtaposed together, those two scenes just didn't.
Yeah, and we mostly get a cutaway before we get to really see them, giving these funeral attendees their comeuppance. We cut away. So
yeah, mind you, the zombies still aren't doing anything, and
nothing.
So it all leads to a big showdown in the center of town, which now is reminiscent of kind of like a Western. I got like a Western feel from this, but with diegetic music, similar to like taps playing in a like a military movie.
That's a good. I didn't put that together at the time, but as soon as you said it, yeah, that's exactly what that reminded me of.
Yeah, and that's playing while one of the biker gals pulls out a grenade and then takes Donnie hostage to get away from the crowd of townspeople that now have borne shotguns and really are coming after the women. So boy, I mean, I feel like this is the longest third act. Because I feel like that would typically be like the climax of a film is the big showdown.
Oh, yeah.
But then it's like up and down from that point on. A lot happens in a short period of time after this. Dee Dee goes looking for Lucille, the first gal that was run over by Willem earlier in the movie. She and Donnie find Lucille's body. Willem shoots and kills Donnie and locks Dee Dee in a freezer. We figure out how he's reanimating these people, now zombies, in a fashion that I don't think I've seen done in the zombie genre. He puts a device that has a battery in their brain. Rob, are you familiar with this technique? Are we an Energizer in the head away from World War Z?
It was... I feel like that whole side of things was so poorly explained, because when he first kills Lucille, the first cycle slut, there's a scene where he's injecting her with something blue. Mm-hmm. But then, as you said, the next scene we get, he's popping a battery in one of the heads. And then later we get the sort of more detailed explanation of how this all connects to the mind. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I have no idea how any of this is happening, or what any of this all really means, or it was just such a very high level, quick kind of brush off way to explain things.
I did the only thing I did really like there was, I did kind of like that idea that we're gonna your brain is electrical, and so the fact that he's putting batteries in there to keep them going is pretty funny. But then I like the look of the scene. I mean, for the limited budget that they obviously dealt with, that looked pretty cool. I mean, it looked like he was sliding it into his brain.
It did, yeah. That was the scene in terms of special effects I was most impressed with in the movie. I pulled that one off well.
It was really gross, and so that means it did its job.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dee Dee eventually escapes from Willem, reconvenes with the Cycle Sluts just as the zombies finally arrive in Zariah, which is funny because then they're all going home, as you said they were mentioning. So they all like show up in their homes, and at one point, one references that this has happened before.
Yeah.
We get a long, drawn-out battle between the townspeople, the biker gang, the zombies, some infighting between Dee Dee and Rox. At some point, we revisit the St. Peter's Home for the Blind Orphans, who are still stuck in the school bus as the zombies attack. The gals save the kids from the zombies and capture Bob the dwarf, who finally explains why Willem is reanimating people. You just referenced that. What do you think about how it all kind of tied together?
I don't fully understand it still, because he references that there's, they did radioactive testing in the mine, but then he was which created some sort of substance in the mine that had value, and they were trying to harvest it, but people kept dying, so he reanimated them so they could go harvest whatever it was. But then it still sort of sounded like that's how he was reanimating them. Like that was a piece of that puzzle too. And I was left going, I don't understand what's happening. But you also, we have to go back briefly and talk about the Uzi that is weirdly and strangely on the school bus for blind orphans. It's a throwaway line when they are first introduced, that the driver of the bus has an Uzi, and then of course they have to use it to what they think at the time is save themselves from the zombies. So we have a blind teen wielding an Uzi with pinpoint accuracy taking out zombies.
And at one point, one of the gals is on the bus with the boy with the Uzi, and instead of grabbing the Uzi and shooting the zombies, she's like guiding him as to where to shoot. I thought that was great. Yeah, it was interesting. The premise is pretty cool. Like, we can't go in there with people. We can't afford robots. Let's create zombies and send them in. And then he was selling the material, so it was worth money for some reason. So so this was the end of the 80s, and we saw a number of zombie films that made social statements, mainly on consumerism, consumption, things of that nature. And I feel like perhaps that our screenwriter Dan Hoskins saw that somewhere, that hey, zombie films make social statements. He wanted to make a feminist statement, and just figured I'll wrap it up in a zombie film somehow. I feel like that might be because they're just so in the background and not really critical to this movie at all, even though they're in the title. So I feel like that might be the reason for them. Well,
yeah, I definitely, there is this sense that there's, enough other stuff between the blind orphans, the biker gang, and the town that you had a whole movie there, but then needed, as you said, to add this social element. So like, how could we get that? Well, throw in zombies too, and make that sort of the backstory. And any piece of that puzzle could have been removed and made for sort of a tighter film. But that's why we're here, so we end up with movies like this.
Yes, but it does lead to some just great lines. There's a hilarious line at one point where the biker gang tells the townspeople that they need to kill the zombies because they're hesitant to, because it's their family, it's their friends, and so they say, we won't kill them. They're us. And Dee Dee yells, "They're gonna eat you!" And one of the townspeople shrugs and walks off, saying, family.
And I did. I mean, that was like, could have been like in a good movie, like a great moment of like heartbreak and we don't want to be the ones to fight them because it's my mom, it's my son, it's my brother, and it gets played for laughs here.
Yeah. There's an awesome sequence when Rox is taking out a bunch of zombies in the street with fireworks exploding behind her. This movie has some really cool shots and decent effects for the limited budget. I mean, the zombies at times looked okay, at times looked like they barely had any makeup on. Not necessarily the zombies, but there's all sorts of explosions. They blew up a house, they blew up a bus, and
that's right.
A majority of the film was shot at night, which I know is never easy, and it looked pretty good overall, all things considered. I mean, we were watching a very old dubbed copy on YouTube, so
busted copy
has to play a role too in the quality.
Absolutely, yeah, and I love the fact too that and it sort of comes out of nowhere that Rox's weapon of choice is a whip. I just loved that element being thrown in there.
Yeah. So this big battle is still going on, Rob, probably 30 minutes in at least, 30 minutes into this final climactic battle. They finally lure the zombies to a church and blow it up, and Willem is killed off in his own hearse. Very fitting. Yeah. The next morning, the gang makes Bob and the blind orphans honorary Cycle Slut members, and then they ride off to the next town, taking a couple guys with them. A couple of the guys. A couple
of the townies, yeah.
Yes.
Which one was Lance, who going back to his and TC's, we get sort of her history of wanting to be a music producer, and him, being sort of happy with being in town, I guess, but then as we find out, he comes back around and wants to leave. And I kind of felt at that point in the movie, when that scene goes down, that these were our focal characters. And it just totally shifts away and goes to Dee Dee and sort of her empowerment, of story. But I thought that it feels like some stuff ended up on the cutting room floor between these two for him to, because he does save them at the end at the church when he takes that one zombie out. So it just felt like there may have been more scenes of him in the movie than actually made the final cut.
Yeah, you probably had multiple storylines planned that just like you said, ended up on the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
It certainly felt that way at the end. And as they're all riding away, one of the townspeople asks, "What about the mine?" And Rox yells, "We took care of it." And then we cut to security footage of the gals sneaking past this one lone zombie who the whole movie has been in a trance, following back and forth of the security camera that was watching the mine door. I loved that. We didn't even bring that up, but then and they filled the mine with dynamite with like an upbeat fake REM song. A fitting ending to a bizarre and wild movie. Rob, what did you think of the way Chopper Chicks in Zombietown wrapped up?
It was a I guess happier ending, I guess, than I expected. I sort of thought somewhere in this, Rox was going to be a casualty, and Dee Dee was going to sort of assume control of the gang, and they would be a little bit more well-adjusted than her leadership brought them. But yeah, I mean, it was a fine ending. They wrapped everything up. There really weren't any loose ends, and like we see in a lot of these movies, and they saved the town. So maybe they are turning into better times and being more beneficial to society.
Yeah, and accepting men now. So step for them too. I thought it was funny too how they just kind of, the cops at some point are going to want to come sort all this out, and they just leaving that mess for the townspeople. You've got a church filled with of dead people blown up,
dead bodies,
blood all over the town, and like, we're out of here. We're moving on. Okay, Rob, so enough about we think. Let's find out what others are saying, and the most efficient way to do that is to poll 1,000 listeners. But we don't have time for that, do we? So instead, I went to Rotten Tomatoes. Unfortunately, there's no official tomato meter score because apparently critics are afraid to review a film named Chopper Chicks in Zombietown. It's a mouthful. I've stumbled over it a couple times.
It's also got it's called Chrome Heart in some circles. Like I ran across that name a couple times in searches I did, although it was never like AKA or but a few people said in some areas it's called that, which I couldn't really find any sort of explanation as to what in some areas meant, but it does have that alternative title. But yeah, there isn't a whole lot about this movie, in general. Like I couldn't find any box office information, any budget information. It's sort of a lesser known and more lost movie than some of the others we've covered.
It had the release in the U.S. at a film festival, so technically giving it a theatrical release, but I don't think other than that it was released anywhere, just straight to video, I'm sure. So no tomato meter score, but it does have an audience score because that a cult classic like this will have its fans, and they delivered. So more than 1,000 ratings from 1 to 100. So of those 1,000 plus ratings, Rob, what do you think the audience score is for Chopper Chicks in Zombietown?
Gosh, I'm so bad at this. I'm going to go 38% on this one.
Not too shabby. A surprisingly low, though, still, I thought, 42%.
Okay.
I thought because it was just the audience score that you might get a little higher review if you're taking the time. But, okay, let's read a few of these reviews, shall we?
Please.
John K. gives it 3 out of 5 stars and writes, "Here's a film that delivers exactly what the title promises, a goofy tale of a female motorcycle gang that wanders into a town that is later overrun by zombies. There is really no honest attempt to explain the zombie outbreak, and it probably isn't necessary anyway. This film is pure Troma-style fun with a gun-wielding, blind school students, foul-mouthed biker chicks, and yes, Billy Bob Thornton. This is typical 1980s late-night cable horror fodder, and with an empty head and a fridge full of beer, it's perfect entertainment. Don't expect anything earth-shattering, and you'll be pleasantly surprised. Quotable, laughable, and a few moments of zombie mayhem, Chopper Chicks is a good time." That's pretty.
Pretty good review.
I mean, he even points out that the town was later overrun by zombies.
Yeah.
It didn't happen right away. They didn't run into Zombietown. It became Zombietown after they got there. So
well, that mine must have really been on the outskirts of town, and as we know, zombies aren't, and back then aren't quick moving, so it took them a while to get to town.
They walked actually by a sign that said 5 miles to the town. So I'm impressed that this movie wasn't like a 5 DVD set of just zombies shuffling down the road at a pace. Okay, Zane R. also gives it 3 stars and writes, Don Calfa's performance is as an unrepentant mad scientist is one of the best things to ever to happen to a Troma movie. The movie is nowhere near as entertaining as its title, but at least it delivers on both the Chopper Chicks and the Zombietown. Can't say the same for Werewolves on Wheels. While it's not officially a Troma film, this is me now, not Zane. So responding to Zane's review, while it's not officially a Troma film, but just a Troma release. But otherwise, Zane, I agree with you 100% on Don Calfa's performance as we discussed earlier. And Werewolves on Wheels? Rob, are you familiar with this 1971 B movie?
I am not. That's another new one for me.
Yeah, it also didn't air on USA Up All Night, but we've got a few outside. We might have to have a few special
homework.
episodes or double features, just like they have where we cover 2. And finally, Christopher R. gives it just 1 star and writes, 1 star because there is one scene where the chick humps a jukebox. Well, there is that, Christopher, and all I can tell you is make sure you do what your big mama told you.
Oh, such a weird scene.
He's so weird. Okay, Rob, so this was somehow the first time for both of us watching Chopper Chicks in Zombietown.
Oh, wait, before we close out,
yeah.
I saw one quote that I have to bring out. It was from efilmcritic.com. And it's just like one of those that you would see on like the DVD or something like that. And it says, it's 7 samurai with lesbian biker trash.
Oh.
And I thought to just even evoke 7 samurai
right
to this movie, I had to bring it up, but that one made me laugh out loud.
Well,
I enjoyed it.
I assume this was written by a male because there was only one lesbian in the group, and that was Rox.
Yes.
And it was made very clear because all the women went out and found male love interests. So, again, pointing out that there's a need for this movie, that women were still not seen in society. And that's essentially the crux of the movie. All right, so now that we've finally seen this movie amazingly for the first time each, time to answer the question, do you think it's worth staying up all night for?
I'm going to have to be brutally honest in this one. And going back to me of the past, I would have very quickly lost interest in this one and changed the channel. So I'm going to have to go with no.
Fair enough.
Even though that, as you said, there is a message to be heard, that was at that time sort of before its time, but it didn't achieve my standards of enjoyment. So
it was an odd film. It was a little bit disjointed. It was hard to follow at times with the number of cast members that they didn't really go into detail with. But I do say that it's worth staying up all night for. But I am disappointed in the movie in that in its heart, with the social statement that it makes about women in society, it should have been more than a B movie. Rob, this almost felt like Spookies in that it was almost scripted as 2 movies in one.
Yeah.
It bounces between serious and silly, literally shot to shot, and the two just don't mix well at all.
And like wildly silly, as you indicate with the circus music.
Yeah. Yes. Every now and again it does, like when the blind boy says, "Oh, geez, blind kids, a midget, dykes on bikes, we could start a sideshow. And then goes on to say to Dee Dee, if we knew our place, like you. In my cultural representation class, we talk a lot about the other and essentially anyone deemed different and how they are presented in cinema. And in the case of this movie, it's told from the ideology of the white male norm, which, as we know, has in fact been the norm since the beginning of this country. And while we've made strides, it is still a dominant ideology. Anyone different in that world struggles to fit in.
Yeah.
And, if you stripped away the reanimation plot line, this could easily have been, I think, a gritty drama that almost fits into the 70s, American New Wave cinema movement after the elimination of the production code, where, films were now allowed to cover much more controversial topics to be explored. There's a poignant scene where Rox lays into the other girls, giving us just a little bit of insight into their history and how they've been abused by men, held down. Rox is really trying to toughen them up, push them to be better in a society that doesn't want them to succeed, but she doesn't know how to do it. And all we know about her backstory is perhaps the odd, unsettling "Do What Your Big Mama Told You" song. So, and that
sort of felt like the crux of the tension between, her and Dee Dee is, she's got that strong message, of trying to, as you said, guide everyone. And Dee Dee just had a sort of maybe thoughts on a better way to get there, a gentler hand than the sort of tough and gruff, and sort of no BS of Rox.
Well, and those two characters very much, I thought, one of the reasons I think I referenced Thelma and Louise is not just the reversal of roles that are typically seen as male roles in this type of movie, but also, Susan Sarandon and Gina Davis in that movie, they had a similar dynamic that Rox and Dee Dee have in this film. But remember, this film was made a couple of years earlier, so pretty interesting. And again, I couldn't get away then also from Dee Dee's kind of Gina Davis lookalike, and just like, wow, we have to say, we joke sometimes, could this have inspired this film later, and you got to ask yourself of this film. So this was kind of like Anchorman, Thelma and Louise, and The Hills Have Eyes all rolled into one. A sentence that I thought I'd never say. But I think the reason, Rob, that I think it's worth staying up all night for is it's definitely worth a watch to see how hard films had to struggle in the 80s to get a loud, strong female message across. So I think it's definitely worth. But definitely not your. There's enough in it to still make it enjoyable as a USA Up All Night film. But it definitely goes deeper than that at times. So, yeah. Okay, so agree to disagree for now.
Said.
And didn't mean to take it so deep, but that's what I got. That's the vibe I got from this film for sure.
Excellent.
All right, so that's going to do it for this episode of Still Up All Night and Chopper Chicks in Zombietown by request. And we're glad to be back in session. If you have a film that you remember watching on USA Up All Night and you'd like us to dive into it, let us know. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Still Up Podcast. And remember, do what your big mama told you.
Get out of my way! Get out of my face! All I wanna do is rock this place. Better do what your big mama told you. Do what your big mama told you. Stop messing with the action, you ain't ready for me. Better do what your big mama told you. Get down to the gristle, get down to the bone. I can shake it with you, I can shake it alone. Better do what your big mama told you. Do what your big mama told you. You can take it, you can leave it, but you take it from me.
John, you don't want TV. You want coitus.
Big Mama told